What starts as a routine first-class flight quickly spirals into chaos when Karen Whitmore decides that a successful black woman like Angela Carter doesn't belong in the same cabin as her. Convinced she has the power to control who sits where, Karen calls security, determined to have Angela removed. But her plan backfires spectacularly. As tensions rise and accusations fly, the entire plane watches in shock as Karen's lies unravel until she finds herself facing consequences she never expected. And just when it seems like things couldn't get worse, an unexpected passenger from economy steps in, ready to settle the score. What happens next? Let's just say this flight takes a turn no one saw coming. Before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? And if you love stories with justice served in twists at every turn, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video. Angela Carter adjusted the cuff of her blazer as she stepped into the first-class cabin of Flight 309 from New York to Los Angeles. She exuded confidence, a woman who had worked her way to success in the world of finance. Her seat, 2A, was by the window. She placed her designer handbag neatly in the overhead compartment before settling in. Across the aisle, Karen Whitmore, a middle-aged woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair, had been watching her since she entered the cabin. Karen was accustomed to exclusivity, to a world where first-class cabins rarely, if ever, included people who looked like Angela. As Angela took out her tablet and a book on global investments, Karen pursed her lips. She shifted in her seat, as if Angela's presence alone disturbed her peace. A flight attendant passed by, and Karen immediately flagged her down. "Excuse me," Karen said, her voice dripping with concern. "I think there's been a mistake. This woman," she gestured toward Angela without even looking at her. "I don't think she belongs in this section." Angela looked up, locking eyes with Karen for the first time. Her expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of something. Behind her eyes, annoyance, but not surprise. The flight attendant, a young woman named Jessica, blinked. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Angela handed her the ticket without hesitation. Jessica scanned it and nodded. "Ms. Carter is in the correct seat, ma'am." Karen's lips pressed together into a thin line. "Are you sure?" Jessica sighed, but kept her professional demeanor. "Yes, ma'am. She has a confirmed first-class ticket." Angela, still seated, gave Karen a small smile. "Looks like I belong here after all." Karen's face flushed. "I don't think you understand. I fly first class all the time. I know the kind of people who usually sit here." Angela arched her brow. "Oh, and what kind of people would that be?" Karen hesitated. She knew better than to say the words out loud, but the implication hung in the air like thick fog. Other passengers in first class had started listening, some exchanging glances, others pretending not to notice. A man across the aisle, a businessman in his 40s, chuckled under his breath. Jessica, sensing the tension, forced a polite smile. "If there's nothing else, ma'am, I'd like to continue assisting other passengers." Karen opened her mouth, then shut it, her eyes flicking back to Angela. "Fine," she muttered, folding her arms. Angela returned to her book, her expression unreadable. But Karen wasn't done. Not even close. As more passengers boarded and the cabin filled, Karen continued to steal glances at Angela, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. A few rows back, a red-haired woman leaned over to her companion and whispered, "This is going to be interesting." Little did she know how right she was, because Karen was about to do something that would change everything. And once she set it in motion, there would be no turning back. The hum of the plane's engines filled the first-class cabin as the last few passengers settled into their seats. Flight attendants made their final checks, ensuring seat belts were fastened and carry-on luggage was properly stowed. Angela glanced at her watch. They would be taking off soon. Across the aisle, Karen was fuming. She had been ignored, dismissed, and worst of all, made to look foolish. How dare that woman sit there as if she belonged? How dare the flight attendant take her side? Karen's fingers curled around her phone. She knew what to do. She would make a call. With exaggerated movements, she pressed her phone to her ear, speaking loudly enough for everyone around her to hear. "Hello? Yes, I need to report a security concern on Flight 309, she said, her voice dripping with urgency. Angela, who had been reading, slowly looked up. Other passengers nearby stiffened. A few exchanged glances, sensing the storm brewing. Karen continued, her voice growing shriller. Yes, I'm sitting next to someone who is making me very uncomfortable. I don't think she's supposed to be here. She's acting suspicious. Angela exhaled through her nose, closing her book. Here we go. Karen wasn't just implying something. She was making an accusation. And Angela knew exactly what kind of accusation it was. A middle-aged man in a gray suit 2 rows ahead turned slightly, listening. A woman with glasses and a laptop raised an eyebrow. A flight attendant at the front of the cabin noticed the shift in energy and made her way toward them. Yes, Karen continued, still into the phone. I don't know if she has the right ticket. I mean, you should see how she looks. She's dressed too professionally, like she's trying to blend in. Angela blinked. Did this woman just say she was too well dressed for first class? Karen's voice became hushed, though still loud enough for those around her to hear. And I don't know what's in her bag. It looks heavy. Who knows what she could be carrying? Angela let out a short, humorless laugh. That's it, she said, loud enough to be heard. You're seriously doing this? Karen turned to her, feigning innocence. I'm just trying to ensure the safety of this flight. Angela leaned forward slightly. By calling security because I have a nice bag? Because I'm sitting here quietly minding my business. Karen scoffed. I don't have to explain myself to you. Before Angela could respond, a deep voice cut in. Excuse me, the businessman across the aisle said, adjusting his tie. Are you seriously calling security because a black woman is sitting next to you? Karen spun toward him, her face turning red. I never said anything about race. He chuckled dryly. You didn't have to. The flight attendant arrived then, her brow furrowed. Is there a problem here? Karen turned to her, putting on her best distressed expression. Yes, actually. I don't feel safe. I think this woman might be a security risk. Angela inhaled sharply. There it was. The accusation fully laid out. The businessman shook his head. The red-haired woman from earlier muttered, unbelievable. The flight attendant Jessica from earlier tilted her head. Ma'am, what exactly has she done to make you feel unsafe? Karen straightened. I just have a bad feeling. Jessica crossed her arms. A bad feeling is not a security threat, ma'am. Karen's nostrils flared. So you're just going to ignore me? What if she was cut off as a voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've received a report from a cabin. Please remain seated as our security team will be addressing the situation. The entire first-class cabin fell into an uneasy silence. Angela sat back, arms crossed, waiting. She had seen this before. She knew how it played out. What she didn't expect was how this time it would be different. The first-class cabin remained eerily silent after the captain's announcement. Passengers exchanged glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Karen sat up straighter, a smug smile creeping onto her face. Angela, however, remained still. She had been in situations like this before. The accusations, the scrutiny, the need to prove herself, none of it was new. But there was something different this time. The way passengers were reacting. The way the flight attendant hadn't immediately jumped to Karen's defense. Karen turned to Angela with a satisfied smirk. You see? I knew something was off about you. Angela met her gaze evenly. You mean the fact that I have a first-class ticket and that bothers you? Karen scoffed. Oh, please. Don't make this about race. The businessman from earlier let out a dry chuckle. It is about race, and we all know it. Before Karen could respond, 2 uniformed air marshals entered the first-class cabin. They moved with authority, their expressions unreadable. The tension thickened instantly. The lead marshal, a tall man with a firm stance, spoke first. We received a report about a security concern. Can someone explain what's going on? Karen immediately straightened, putting on her best concerned citizen act. Yes, that's me. I called because this woman, she jabbed a finger at Angela without even looking at her, is acting suspiciously. I don't think she belongs here." Angela sighed, shaking her head. The second marshal, a shorter man with sharp eyes, turned to Angela. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Without hesitation, Angela reached into her blazer pocket and handed it over. The lead marshal examined it, then looked at the airline's flight attendant. Jessica nodded. "She's in the correct seat. She's been calm the entire flight. The only disturbance has come from..." She trailed off, her eyes shifting to Karen. The lead marshal glanced at Karen. "Ma'am, do you have any reason to believe she's a threat?" Karen huffed dramatically. "I told you. She doesn't look like she belongs in first class. And she's carrying a big bag, I don't know what's inside." A murmur rippled through the cabin. More passengers turned toward Karen now, some whispering, others outright glaring at her. The second marshal's lips pressed into a thin line. "So you reported a fellow passenger because of her bag?" Karen flushed. "Well, I felt uncomfortable. Isn't that enough?" The businessman scoffed. "Unbelievable." The air marshals exchanged a glance. Then the lead marshal's voice dropped into a firmer tone. "Ma'am, we take security threats seriously. Making a false report is a violation of federal law." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her face drained of color. "False? I didn't lie." The second marshal stepped closer. "You claim she was acting suspiciously. Yet, by all accounts, she's done nothing but sit in her assigned seat and read a book." Karen sputtered. But I didn't feel safe." The lead marshal's eyes darkened. "Ma'am, feeling uncomfortable isn't the same as a security threat. Do you understand the severity of what you've done?" Angela leaned back in her seat, watching the scene unfold with quiet patience. Karen looked around, expecting support. But every passenger who met her gaze either looked disgusted or outright ignored her. Even the flight attendants kept their expressions neutral. Panic flickered across Karen's face. "Wait, are you saying I did something wrong?" The lead marshal crossed his arms. "You wasted security resources, disrupted the flight, and falsely accused a passenger. That is wrong." Karen's breathing became erratic. "No, this isn't happening. I'm the victim here." Angela arched a brow. "Are you, though?" The businessman chuckled. "I think she just realized she's the one in trouble." Karen turned to the flight attendants. "I demand to speak to the captain." Jessica gave a tight smile. "The captain has already been informed. He has zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior on his flights." Karen's lips trembled. "Discriminatory? That's not what this is." But no one was listening anymore, and Karen was beginning to realize she had made a mistake. A very big mistake. Karen's world was unraveling faster than she could grasp. Just moments ago, she had been confident, certain that she was in the right, that the system would back her up like it always had. But now, as the two air marshals stood before her, their expressions unreadable, she realized something terrifying. She was losing control. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble," she stammered, her voice faltering. "I was just trying to keep everyone safe." The lead marshal's eyes remained cold. "Ma'am, causing a false security alert is a serious matter. You could face legal consequences." Karen's breath hitched. "Legal consequences? Wait, no, this is ridiculous. I was just voicing a concern. That's my right, isn't it?" Angela let out a quiet sigh and shook her head, more disappointed than surprised. "You're right." The businessman from across the aisle scoffed. "Lady, your right doesn't include trying to get an innocent woman kicked off a flight just because you don't like the way she looks." Karen whipped around, glaring at him. "Stay out of this." "No," the red-haired woman from earlier interjected. "I think we're all in this now. You've disrupted everyone's flight over nothing." A murmur of agreement rippled through first class. The passengers, who had once been silent bystanders, were now voicing their disdain. Karen's face turned an ugly shade of red. "This is insane. I'm being attacked for trying to do the right thing." Angela, who had been calmly observing, finally spoke up. "The right thing?" She folded her arms. "Tell me, what exactly was the right thing?" Assuming I didn't belong here? Calling security on me for reading a book? Accusing me of what? Existing too close to you. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Angela shook her head. You called security on me just because you could. And now you're upset because, for once, it's not working in your favor. Karen's jaw clenched. That's not true. The lead marshal cleared his throat, silencing the growing whispers around them. Ma'am, he said, his tone now firm, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass as well. Karen blinked. My boarding pass? Yes, the marshal repeated. Now. Her fingers fumbled as she dug into her purse, pulling out the crumpled slip of paper. She thrust it forward, her hands shaking slightly. The lead marshal took it, scanned the details, then handed it to the flight attendant standing nearby. Jessica glanced at it, her face unreadable. Then she turned to Karen, her lips pressing into a thin line. This isn't a first-class ticket, she said evenly. Silence. Karen's entire body stiffened. That's a mistake, she stammered. I paid for first class. Jessica checked the manifest again. No, ma'am, you didn't. You have a ticket for economy. A few gasps echoed through the cabin. The businessman let out a chuckle. Oh, this just keeps getting better. Karen's lips parted in shock. That's impossible. There has to be a mistake. Jessica remained composed. The only mistake is that you're sitting in the wrong section. You're not supposed to be here. Karen's breathing turned shallow. No. I belong here. This is my seat. Angela tilted her head. Funny. That's exactly what you said about me. The lead marshal's voice was sharper now. Ma'am, did you knowingly take a seat in first class without the right ticket? Karen's head jerked from side to side. No. This is discrimination. The red-haired woman let out a short laugh. Oh, now you want to talk about discrimination. Karen's hands clenched into fists. This isn't fair, she cried. You're all ganging up on me. Angela sighed and leaned back in her seat. You know what's really unfair? The fact that if I had been the one sitting in the wrong section, I would have been escorted off this plane before we even took off. Karen flinched. She knew Angela was right. The lead marshal's voice turned cold. Ma'am, I need you to come with us. Karen's eyes widened. What? You're in violation of airline policy. You'll be moved to your assigned seat immediately. Karen shook her head furiously. No, you can't do this to me. I deserve to be here. Angela exhaled through her nose, shaking her head. No, Karen, you don't. And for the first time, Karen realized no one was coming to save her. Karen sat frozen, her mind struggling to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. She had been so sure, so confident that she was the one in control. Yet now, she was the one being asked to leave. Her lips trembled as she turned to the lead air marshal. You don't understand. This is a mistake. I should be here. This is my seat. The marshal remained unmoved. Ma'am, your ticket says otherwise. Karen's fingers tightened around the armrest. Then I want to speak to the captain, she demanded, her voice rising. He'll fix this. Jessica, the flight attendant, exhaled sharply, already losing patience. The captain is fully aware of the situation, ma'am, and his policy is very clear. If you don't belong in first class, you don't sit in first class. Karen shook her head violently. No, you can't treat me like this. I deserve to be here. Angela watched the meltdown unfold, her expression unreadable. But she felt it, that deep, almost bitter sense of irony. Just minutes ago, Karen had been so certain she didn't belong. Now, the truth had slapped her in the face. The businessman across the aisle leaned back in his seat, arms crossed. Well, this is awkward. The red-haired woman nodded. Fascinating how fast things change, huh? Karen's eyes darted between them, her face growing red. Shut up, she snapped. The lead marshal took a step forward. Ma'am, you have two choices. Move to your assigned seat in economy, or we can escort you off the plane entirely. Karen let out a shrill laugh. Escort me? You're threatening to kick me off. The second marshal, the shorter one with sharp eyes, nodded. Yes, ma'am. That is exactly what we're saying. Karen's breath came faster, panic creeping in. She turned to the other passengers, seeking sympathy, support, anything. But there was none. Only cold, unimpressed stares. Angela, still seated, tilted her head. That's the funny thing about privilege, isn't it? You don't really notice it until it stops working in your favor. Karen's lips trembled. This is humiliation, she hissed. Angela let out a dry chuckle. Now that's something I know about. The businessman smirked. Maybe she can take that seat she was so sure you didn't belong in. Karen's jaw clenched, but she had no response. The lead marshal sighed. Last chance, ma'am. Are you moving to economy, or are we escorting you off? Karen's hands balled into fists. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But it was. With a final, furious glare at Angela, Karen shot up from her seat. She grabbed her bag and shoved past the marshals, stomping toward the curtain separating first class from economy. The moment she disappeared into the lower section of the plane, the tension in first class evaporated. Passengers let out quiet sighs of relief. The businessman chuckled under his breath. Jessica, the flight attendant, looked visibly relieved. Angela simply exhaled, unfolding her arms. Well, she murmured, that was exhausting. The red-haired woman grinned. You handled that like a pro. Angela gave a half smile. Not my first rodeo. Jessica straightened. Ms. Carter, I sincerely apologize for that ordeal. If there's anything I can get you, please let me know. Angela thought for a moment, then smiled. A glass of red wine would be great. Jessica nodded. Coming right up. As the flight returned to normal, Angela leaned back in her seat, her book still resting on her lap. But something told her this wasn't over. Not yet. The curtain separating first class from economy had barely settled before the murmurs began. Passengers whispered among themselves, shaking their heads, still processing what had just happened. Angela, now comfortably sipping her red wine, could feel the weight of their stares not at her, but at the space Karen had occupied just moments ago. Across the aisle, the businessman smirked. Well, I think we can all agree that was the most entertaining pre-flight drama we've ever had. The red-haired woman chuckled. Almost worth the price of a first-class ticket. Angela exhaled, shaking her head. Almost. Just as she was about to return to her book, Jessica, the flight attendant, returned, her face tense. Ms. Carter, she said in a hushed tone, leaning slightly toward Angela's seat. I just wanted to give you a heads up. The passenger we relocated, she hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. She's still causing problems. Angela sighed. Of course she is. Jessica glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening too closely. She's been complaining nonstop to the crew, saying she was mistreated, that she's going to file a formal complaint against the airline. And Jessica hesitated again. She's demanding to speak. To the captain. Angela's eyebrows lifted. Let me guess she wants her seat back? Jessica nodded grimly. She insists she was unjustly removed and says she has every right to be in first class. The businessman scoffed. The audacity. Angela let out a slow breath. So what happens now? Jessica hesitated before answering. The captain doesn't tolerate this kind of behavior. If she keeps escalating, there's a real chance we'll have to turn the plane around and remove her before takeoff. Angela groaned internally. She had no sympathy for Karen, but the last thing she wanted was for an entire flight to be delayed because of this nonsense. What are the odds she'll calm down? Angela asked. Jessica gave her a tight-lipped smile. Not great. As if on cue, a commotion erupted from behind the curtain. Angela's stomach sank. Here we go. Karen wasn't done. Suddenly, the curtain whipped open, and there she was, Karen Whitmore, her face flushed red, eyes blazing with indignation. Behind her, a frazzled flight attendant and the second air marshal tried to intercept her, but Karen marched forward, ignoring them completely. Angela sighed and set her wine glass down. Karen pointed a shaking finger at her. You, she spat, her voice carrying through the cabin. You did this to me. The businessman groaned. Oh, for the love of Jessica, stepped forward. Ma'am, you cannot be up here. Karen whirled on her. Oh, really? I paid for this flight. I have rights. The lead air marshal reappeared, his expression darkening. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you return to your seat." Now, Karen ignored him, her gaze snapping back to Angela. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" she sneered. "Sitting there all smug, watching me get humiliated." Angela tilted her head. "You did that all on your own." Karen's hands clenched into fists. "This isn't over. I have friends in high places, people who won't tolerate this discrimination." Angela arched an eyebrow. "Discrimination?" Karen's nostrils flared. "Oh, don't act so innocent. The real reason I was removed is because no one wanted to hear the truth that you don't belong here." A hush fell over the cabin. Angela let the words settle in the air, unbothered. Then, calmly, she asked, "Tell me, Karen, do you still think you belong here?" Karen opened her mouth, then hesitated. Because, for the first time, she realized something. She was alone. No one spoke up in her defense. No one came to her rescue. The first-class passengers she had once seen as her peers now looked at her with disgust, some even turning away, uninterested in whatever tantrum she was about to throw next. Angela didn't need to say another word. The silence around Karen was enough. A deep voice broke the tension. "Ma'am," the lead marshal said, his patience officially gone, "I'm done asking. You're leaving this plane." Karen's head snapped toward him. "What? You've refused multiple orders from the crew, caused a disruption, and attempted to re-enter first class against instructions. You're officially being removed from this flight." Karen's eyes widened. "No, you can't." The marshal motioned to the second officer. "Escort her off." Panic set in. No, this is a mistake." She turned to Jessica. "I'll sue this airline." Jessica smiled politely. "Good luck with that." Karen whirled back to Angela. "You think you've won? You think this is funny?" Angela picked up her wine glass again, swirling the liquid inside. "I think it's over." And with that, the marshals each grabbed one of Karen's arms and dragged her away. As the curtain closed behind them, sealing Karen's fate, the businessman let out a low whistle. "Well," he said, "that escalated quickly." Angela exhaled, her first deep breath of relief since boarding. Karen was finally gone, but Angela had a feeling this wouldn't be the last she'd hear of her. The cabin of Flight 309 finally settled into an uneasy silence. The air still crackled with tension, as if the ghost of Karen's outburst lingered in the space she had occupied. But she was gone now, dragged off the plane by the air marshals, her protests fading as the curtain to the jet bridge sealed behind her. Angela let out a long, slow breath. It was over, or at least it should have been. Jessica, the flight attendant, adjusted her uniform, trying to regain composure after the commotion. She turned to Angela, her expression tinged with exhaustion, but also admiration. "Ms. Carter, I really am sorry for everything you just went through." Angela gave a small, knowing smile. "I appreciate that. But let's be honest, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. And unfortunately, it probably won't be the last." Jessica's face darkened, but she nodded. "Still, it wasn't right. And I want you to know the captain fully supports how this was handled. If you need anything, just let me know." Angela raised her glass. Another refill wouldn't hurt. Jessica let out a small laugh, nodding before heading toward the galley. Across the aisle, the businessman, who had defended Angela earlier, turned toward her. "I don't know how you stayed so calm," he said, shaking his head. "If that had been me, I don't think I could have kept my cool." Angela smirked. "Let's just say experience." The red-haired woman in the row behind leaned forward. "Well, I loved how you shut her down at the end. That look on her face when she realized she had no allies left? Chef's kiss." She made a dramatic motion with her fingers. Angela chuckled. "I can't take all the credit. Karen did most of the work herself." The businessman laughed. "Still, you handled it like a pro." Angela sipped her wine, letting the warmth spread through her. It was nice to feel support, but she knew this moment of solidarity wouldn't last forever. Too often, people would nod and agree in the moment, but remain silent when it truly mattered. Still, tonight, she had won. And that was worth something. The PA system crackled, and the captain's voice came through. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the slight delay. We'll be departing shortly. Please remain seated, and thank you for your patience." The murmur of relief rippled through first class. People adjusted their seats, buckled in, and prepared for takeoff. Angela turned back to her book, letting herself settle in at last. But before she could lose herself in the words, Jessica returned with her drink. "Here you go," she said, placing the fresh glass of wine on Angela's tray table. Then, lowering her voice, she added, "Oh, and by the way, the gate agents just informed us Karen won't be getting on another flight tonight." Angela arched an eyebrow. "Really?" Jessica grinned. Apparently, she caused such a scene while being escorted out that security had to step in. And now she's been banned from flying with us. The businessman nearly spits out his drink. "Banned? Oh, that's priceless." The red-haired woman let out a delighted gasp. "Talk about karma." Angela let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "That tracks." Jessica sighed dramatically. "And just when I thought I'd seen it all." Angela raised her glass slightly. "To surprises." Jessica smiled and moved down the aisle as the plane finally began to taxi toward the runway. Angela stared out the window, watching the lights of the airport blur past. She knew Karen wouldn't just let this go. People like her never did. But at least for now, she could enjoy the peace. For the first time that night, Angela truly relaxed. The plane picked up speed, and Flight 309 took off into the sky. As Flight 309 soared above the clouds, the tension in first class had almost completely dissipated. Passengers reclined their seats, some watching movies, others enjoying their drinks. Angela finally allowed herself to unwind, turning the pages of her book while savoring her wine. For the first time since boarding, it felt like a normal flight. But normal never lasted long. Midway through the flight, as the cabin remained dimly lit with soft overhead lights, Jessica, the flight attendant, reappeared by Angela's seat, this time with an expression that set off alarm bells in Angela's mind. "Ms. Carter," Jessica said quietly, "I need to inform you of something." Angela set her book down. "That doesn't sound good." Jessica hesitated. "Well, Karen might be off the plane, but someone connected to her isn't." Angela's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Jessica leaned in slightly, keeping her voice low. "There's a passenger in economy who has been asking about you ever since takeoff. He wasn't part of the earlier incident, but when he boarded, he apparently saw Karen being removed, and, well, he's not happy about it." Angela sat up straighter. "Who is he?" Jessica glanced toward the curtain separating the cabins. "Middle-aged. Man, expensive watch. Sharp suit, definitely not your typical economy passenger. He called one of the attendants over earlier and demanded to know why Karen was removed." Angela's stomach tightened. "And what did they tell him?" "Only the basics. That she had been disruptive and was taken off the flight. But after that, he asked for your name. He even tried to convince the attendant to bring him up here." Angela exhaled sharply, irritation creeping into her voice. "So let me guess he thinks I'm the problem?" Jessica nodded grimly. "Seems like it. We told him he wasn't allowed in first class, but he's been watching from his seat. I just thought you should know." Angela let out a humorless laugh. "Unbelievable. First, I get accused of not belonging in first class, and now some guy from economy thinks he has the right to confront me." Jessica's expression softened. "I know, and I swear if he tries anything, we'll shut it down immediately." Angela sighed, tapping her fingers against her tray table. "What's his name?" Jessica checked her notepad. "Lucas Whitmore." Angela's stomach dropped. "Wait, Whitmore." Jessica nodded. "Yep. I'm guessing that's not a coincidence." Angela closed her eyes briefly. Karen had a backup plan. Lucas had to be related to her. A husband? A brother? Either way, it was clear he wasn't going to let what happened go unchallenged. Angela glanced toward the curtain. She couldn't see him, but the thought of his eyes lingering on her made her skin crawl. Jessica, sensing her unease, straightened. "Like I said, if he causes a problem, we'll handle it." Angela met her gaze. "I appreciate that. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like the Whitmores don't know when to stop." Jessica sighed. Well, let's hope he stays in his seat. But if anything happens, just press the call button. Angela nodded, but she already knew the truth. Lucas Whitmore wasn't just going to sit quietly. He was waiting. And sooner or later he was going to make his move. Angela stared at the curtain separating first class from economy, the weight of Jessica's words settling deep in her chest. Lucas Whitmore. The name alone was enough to set off alarms. The fact that Karen had someone on this flight, watching, waiting, that wasn't a coincidence. Angela had seen this play out before. People like Karen never went down without a fight. And if Lucas was anything like her, he wouldn't just sit quietly in economy. He was going to make his move. The only question was when. For the next 20 minutes, Angela forced herself to remain calm. She kept her book open, but she barely read a word. Instead, she listened to the murmurs, the footsteps, the shift in energy every time a flight attendant passed through the curtain. Then, just as she expected, it happened. A male voice, deep and assertive, pierced the air from behind the curtain. I demand to speak to someone in charge. The conversation between passengers died instantly. The businessman across the aisle from Angela sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. Oh, now what? The red-haired woman muttered. I swear, this flight is cursed. Angela set her book down. Here we go. Jessica and... Another flight attendant hurried toward the economy section, their footsteps quick and purposeful. Angela couldn't see Lucas Whitmore, but she could hear him. This is an outrage, he barked. I want an explanation right now. Jessica's voice, though calmer, carried a sharpness Angela recognized as controlled frustration. Sir, we've already explained the situation. Ms. Whitmore was removed for violating airline policy. There is nothing else to discuss. You expect me to just accept that? Lucas snapped. You humiliated my wife. Angela's eyebrows lifted. Wife. That explained everything. Lucas continued, his voice rising. She's an elite flyer, a loyal customer, and you just dragged her off like some criminal. Sir, I bet I know what this is really about, Lucas sneered. It's because she's a white woman, isn't it? The tension in first class spiked. A few passengers groaned aloud, while others exchanged looks of exasperation. Angela clenched her jaw. So that's the angle he was going to take. The businessman muttered, this guy's as bad as his wife. Lucas wasn't done. I want to speak to whoever made the decision. I want to speak to the captain. Jessica held firm. The captain is flying this plane, sir. And I will tell you one more time, this conversation is over. Silence. For a brief moment, Angela thought maybe, just maybe, Lucas would back down. Then the curtain whipped open, and there he was. Lucas Whitmore stood in the aisle, towering and furious. His expensive suit barely masked the rage radiating off him. His eyes locked onto Angela immediately, as if she were the cause of everything. Angela didn't flinch. She refused to. Lucas took a slow step forward. You. Jessica quickly stepped between them. Sir, you are not allowed in first class. Lucas didn't even acknowledge her. His eyes stayed on Angela. You're the one who did this to my wife, he said, voice low but threatening. Angela finally spoke. No, your wife did this to herself. Lucas's fists clenched. She's humiliated. Because of you. Angela tilted her head slightly. No, because of her own actions. Lucas took another step forward, but this time the air marshal was there. Mr. Whitmore, the lead marshal said, his voice edged with warning. Step back. Now. Lucas exhaled sharply through his nose, nostrils flaring. But he didn't move. Angela stared him down. She had seen men like him before, men who had never been told no, who had never been held accountable for anything. Lucas leaned in just slightly. You think you're untouchable, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Angela didn't blink. No, but I know you're about to be. The second marshal stepped in then, grabbing Lucas firmly by the arm. Sir, you are officially violating federal regulations. You will return to your seat, or we will restrain you. Lucas jerked his arm back. Don't you dare touch me. Passengers were fully watching now, some with their phones out, some whispering, others outright glaring at Lucas. The businessman shook his head. This guy doesn't get it. Lucas scanned the cabin, looking for support. He found none. Not a single person backed him up. Angela leaned back in her seat. Funny, she said, voice calm. You sound just like your wife. Lucas's jaw tightened, his face turning an ugly shade of red. The lead marshal moved in closer. Sir, last chance. Sit down. For a moment, Angela thought Lucas might actually lunge at her. Then, through gritted teeth, he spat. This isn't over. Angela sipped her wine. Oh, I think it is. The marshal nodded to the second officer. Escort him back. If he so much as stands up again, he's getting zip-tied. Lucas snapped. You'll regret this, he snarled. But the marshals dragged him back through the curtain before he could say anything else. The moment the curtain fell shut, the tension in the cabin snapped like a stretched rubber band. The businessman exhaled loudly. What a circus. The red-haired woman let out a dramatic sigh. Do the Whitmores ever shut up? Jessica pinched the bridge of her nose. I swear I need a raise. Angela, at last, let herself breathe. She didn't know what would happen when the flight landed. But one thing was for sure. She had won. The first-class cabin remained tense long after the curtain fell shut, sealing Lucas Whitmore back in economy, where he belonged. The energy of the altercation still crackled in the air, but something was different now. The passengers weren't just watching. They weren't just silently tolerating the drama. This time, they were on Angela's side. She could feel it the shift. The businessman's approving nod. The red-haired woman's whispered unbelievable under her breath. Even Jessica, the flight attendant, looked at Angela with something more than just professional politeness. Respect. Angela exhaled, leaning back in her seat as the flight finally settled. This battle was over, but she knew better than to let her guard down completely. People like the Whitmores didn't just accept defeat. About an hour later, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Los Angeles. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing. Angela glanced out the window. The city lights sparkled below, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. A few more minutes, and this entire ordeal would be behind her. Jessica passed by, securing tray tables and reminding passengers to fasten their seatbelts. When she reached Angela, she paused. You okay, she asked softly. Angela gave a small smile. I've had worse flights. Jessica chuckled. I believe it. But just so you know, security will be waiting at the gate for Mr. Whitmore. Angela raised an eyebrow. Security. Jessica nodded. The marshals filed a report. His behavior was way over the line. He'll be having a little chat with airport authorities when we land. Angela took a slow sip of her wine, savoring the information. Now that is a first-class experience. Jessica grinned before continuing down the aisle. The plane landed smoothly, rolling down the runway before taxiing toward the gate. Angela could feel the collective relief of the passengers, eager to leave behind the drama of the flight. As the plane came to a stop and the seatbelt sign switched off, Angela remained seated, letting the impatient passengers rush to grab their luggage first. She had no reason to hurry, because she knew something was about to happen. And she was right. The moment the cabin doors opened, two uniformed airport security officers stepped inside. Passengers whispered. Heads turned. All eyes went to the curtain separating first class from economy. Then Lucas Whitmore appeared, escorted by the air marshals. His face was red with fury, his suit slightly wrinkled from the struggle. He was still arguing, his voice carrying through the cabin. This is harassment. Lucas barked. I was defending my wife. I have done nothing wrong. The lead marshal barely reacted. Sir, step aside. Lucas dug his heels in. This is discrimination. I will sue this airline for everything it's worth. You'll all be out of jobs when I'm done with you. Passengers groaned audibly now. Someone muttered, give it a rest, man. Angela just sat back, watching it unfold. Let him dig his own grave. Then, as Lucas was being escorted past first class, he made a mistake. He turned and looked directly at Angela. "You think you've won," he sneered. Angela raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "I think you got yourself banned from an airline in under 5 hours. That has to be some kind of record." A few passengers laughed outright. The businessman across the aisle even clapped. Lucas's hands balled into fists. "This isn't over." Angela tilted her head. "Oh, it is. For you." And then, the moment that sealed it, one of the security officers pulled out a tablet, scrolling through something before looking up. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us. There's an active warrant under your name." The cabin fell silent. Lucas froze. "What?" he sputtered. The officer didn't flinch. "You're wanted for financial fraud and tax evasion. This flight might have actually saved us some trouble finding you." Passengers gasped. A few whispered excitedly. Angela just smirked. Lucas's eyes darted around the cabin, but there was nowhere left to run. The officer tightened his grip on Lucas's arm. "Let's go." And just like that, Lucas Whitmore, husband of Karen Whitmore, was dragged off the plane in handcuffs. Passengers cheered. Angela picked up her wine glass and held it up in an invisible toast. "Now that's how you end a flight." The businessman laughed. "I'd fly first class with you any day." The red-haired woman grinned. This flight had everything: discrimination, karma, and an arrest. 10 out of 10. Angela finally stood, stretching her arms before grabbing her bag. As she walked toward the exit, she felt the weight of what had happened settle in. This time, for once, justice had won. And she had a feeling Karen was about to lose even more once she heard what happened to her husband. As Angela stepped into the airport terminal, she smiled to herself. Flight 309 was one she'd never forget. And that, my friends, is what happens when karma takes the pilot seat. From a false accusation to a first-class downfall, the Whitmores got exactly what they deserved. But what do you think? Did justice truly win in the end? Let me know where in the world you're watching from in the comments. And if you love stories with wild plot twists and satisfying endings, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. See you in the next one.